So, what is volume? Volume is a measurement of how much space is taken up by a three-dimensional object. So, examples of objects that have volume are a tin, so the volume of the soup inside the tin, a box, a tube, a bottle. We also have cans, cones, so anything that you can have space taken up, that's the volume of a shape. So the units used are different whether it's a solid volume or a liquid volume. For solid volumes, we're using cubic units. So if you remember, when we're measuring a length, we're measuring it in millimeters, centimeters, meters, kilometers for metric units. If we were working out area, we then used squared units. So it became millimeters squared and centimeters squared. So if we're working out volume, it's going to be cubic units. So we can have cubic centimeters, cubic meters, and you can see there that the short way of writing that is centimeters with a little cubed sign, or meters with a little cubed sign after it. The units used to measure liquid volumes are milliliters, which is often abbreviated to ml, and litres, which is often abbreviated to L. So, which of these objects do you think holds less water when full? A bath or a sink? So obviously a sink holds less water because it has a smaller volume. So if I asked you to put these shapes in order, starting with the one that holds the most, what do you think? And we've got a litre tin of paint, a watering can, and a can of Diet Cola. So the one that holds the most is the one that has the biggest volume. And so we're going to move that watering can because it has the biggest volume. Then the one that's got the next largest volume would be your tin of paint. And obviously our can of Diet Cola is going to have the smallest volume. And most typical cans have a volume of about 330 millilitres. So we've got two different items here. We've got some crispy pops and we've got a pot noodle. Which takes up less space, a packet of breakfast cereal or a pot noodle? Well, it's clear just from looking at the picture that it's the pot noodle that takes up less space. And if you've got a pot noodle and a box of cereal in your cupboard, go and have a look at it and see the difference in size between them. So now we want to put these shapes in order, starting with the one which is going to take up the most space. So in the last example, the least space was the smallest object. So the one that's going to take up the most space is obviously going to be the largest object. So which one do you think it is? Well, it's going to be the bag of potatoes. So we're going to put that first. Now, what do you think we're going to put? Yes, you're right, the jug of water. Then the ice cream cone. Then the golf ball. And finally, the rubber is going to be the one that takes up the least amount of space. So let's look at a recipe for 8 fruit scones. We've got 4 cups of milk, 225 grams of butter, half a teaspoon of salt, 30 grams of caster sugar, a cup of mixed fruit, 3 tablespoons of baking powder, 3 cups of self-raising flour, and 1 egg. So let's think about some questions and see if you can answer them. How much caster sugar is used? So hopefully you said 30 grams. So we use 30 grams of caster sugar. Which piece of cutlery is used to measure out the baking powder? So look for baking powder and what piece of cutlery has been used? Yep, you're quite right, it is a tablespoon. What does the recipe use less of? Self-raising flour or milk? So now you have to compare the amount of milk and the amount of flour and decide which one the recipe is using less of. And yes, that's right, 4 cups of milk, 3 cups of self-raising flour, so we're using less flour. So the amount above shows we'll make 8 scones. If I wanted to make 24 scones, how much butter will I need to use? So the first thing we have to do here, and I'm going to do some writing at the bottom, is for 8 scones, I'm using 225 grams of butter. So if I want 24 scones, what if I had to multiply the 8 by to get the 24? I've had to times that by 3. So I need to times the 225 by 3 to get my answer. So 5 times 3 is 15. 3 times 2 is 6 plus 1 is 7. And 3 times 2 is 6. So it's going to be 675 grams. If I only had enough milk for 2 cupfuls left in the house, but still wanted to make a few scones, according to the recipe, how many could I make? Right, so this time we're looking at the recipe for 8 scones. So 8 scones requires 4 cups. Now I've only got 2 cups. So I've got half as many cups of milk. So that means I'm only going to be able to make half as many scones. So I need to divide that 8 by 2. So I will be able to make 4 scones. Now the last question I've got for you is going back to your fractions. I had bought a box of half a dozen eggs. What fraction of the box of eggs was used in the above recipe? So, how many eggs is in half a dozen? So think about a box of eggs that you buy in a shop. You can get boxes of a dozen eggs, you can get boxes of more than that, but half a dozen eggs gives us a total of 6 eggs. And our recipe uses 1 out of 6 eggs. So the fraction of the box of eggs that we used in this recipe is 1 out of 6. So let's think about liquid volumes to start off with. So as I said, they're measured in milliliters or litres, and those are the most common units. So examples of volume are a jug, which holds about 1 litre or 1,000 millilitres, a paper cup, which holds 200 millilitres, and a teaspoon, which holds about 5 millilitres. And we need to remember that conversion, that 1 litre equals 1,000 millilitres, because it will help us do our converting between the two units. Since there are 1,000 millilitres in 1 litre, to convert between millilitres and litres, we must multiply or divide the given amount by 1,000. So if you remember back to our units of length, this is like going between metres and kilometres. So remember, when we went from kilometres to metres, we multiplied by 1,000. So now we're going from litres to millilitres, we're going to multiply by 1,000. When we were going from metres to kilometres, we divided by 1,000. So if we're going from millilitres to litres, we're going to divide by 1,000. So let's have a look at a couple of examples. We want to convert 4.7 litres to millilitres. So litres to millilitres, we're multiplying by 1,000. So we're going to say we've got 4.7 and we're going to multiply that by 1,000. Now, you can use a calculator. If you don't have a calculator handy, then we're going to use our decimal jumps. And our 1,000 tells us we need 3 decimal jumps. So we're going to jump over the 7, but then we need 2 more jumps, and so we need to put zeros underneath those jumps. So our final answer is going to be 4,700 700 millilitres. And you can use the abbreviation ml instead of writing out the whole word. Now, if we want to convert 8,530 millilitres to litres, then we're going the opposite way. We're going to be dividing by 1,000. So we're going to start off with our 8,530 and we're going to divide by 1,000. So this time our decimal jumps, still doing 3 of them, but we're going the opposite direction. We're jumping to the left. So we're going to jump from the after the 0 to before the 0. That's one jump, before the 3 and before the 5. So our decimal point is going to end up between the 8 and the 5. So that's 8.53. And you can write the 0. You don't really need the 0. And you can use an L for litres. Now there is another way that we could write this. If you want to write it in litres and millilitres, then what you're going to do is you're going to take the whole number, so the number of thousands, which is 8, and it's going to be 8 litres. And once you've taken your thousands off, you're left with 530 millilitres. So you can write it in either way, but writing it as a decimal is probably the easiest way of doing it.